What's going on, guys? It's Red Bull Tanker, and welcome back to Axis and Allies 1951 Europe. This is turn 7. It is now August of 1951. Going over to our random event this turn, we've come down to the next section. So, as you can see on the calendar, again, we are August to January 1951, and so this second row now represents the random events that can happen between August and January of 1951 to 1952. So, a 2 was rolled this time. This random event, Czechoslovakia is in rebellion, and the USSR must occupy both Slovakia and the Sudetenland by the end of the turn, or they lose the income for those territories. And just kind of going over, you'll kind of see that already did happen. Why is my camera all weird? I apologize, guys. Let's see if that helps a little bit. Sorry about that. Okay, that cleared up a lot better. I apologize. All right, and then for the initiative roll, it went the U.S., the Soviets, and then NATO. Okay, so starting off with the U.S., they had 54 to spend. They spent it all. If I can put my camera in the right spot so you can kind of see better. Okay, so the U.S. kind of did their traditional buys. They bought 2 infantry, 2 armor. They decided to pay 22 to replace their B-47 that got lost earlier in the game. And they also bought a fighter. Combat. Alright, this is where the game kind of got a little interesting. So the U.S. 7th Army that was in Austria decided to split its forces because the Soviets had actually left open pretty much their entire Air Force, or a good chunk of the Air Force. As if you can remember, the Soviets had their two Tu-4s and a fighter here in Slovakia, only being guarded by three tanks. And then down here in Hungary, the Soviets had 2 mechanized infantry guarding 3 fighters and a jet. So the 7th Army decided to split its forces and try and bag a large portion of the Soviet Air Force. So, on the 7th Army's attack into Slovakia, the U.S. Did go in with the 3 regiments of the 4th Infantry Division, 2 artillery, the 3 regiments of the 8th Armored Division. So that's 3 infantry, 2 artillery, 3 armor, or 3 tanks, and then 2 tactical bombers, one coming out of Rome and the other one coming off of the U.S. carrier here in C-Zone 17. In that battle, the Soviets did scramble 3 jets out of West Poland. In the ensuing scramble fight, the U.S. was not able to kill any of the jets, but the Soviets were able to hit a U.S. tactical. And then overall, the casualties were the Soviets lost their 3 tanks, fighter, and 2 strategic bombers. So the Soviet strategic bomber force was utterly obliterated. And the U.S. suffered the 3 infantry losses. So 3 infantry and 2 artillery. So the 4th Infantry Division has been destroyed in the attempt. And all that was left in Slovakia were the 3 tanks of the 8th Armored Division. Alright, and then coming down here for the main drive of the U.S. 7th Army here in Hungary. The U.S. went in with 3 infantry, which was the 5th Infantry Division, 1 airborne regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, the 2 mechs of the 34th/47th Infantry Division, and then they also had let's see here. They had 3 artillery, 3 tank, and then 6 tanks, 3 for the 3rd Armored Division and 3 for the 6th Armored Division. Casualties ended up being the 3 infantry from the 5th the 5th, excuse me, the casualties were the 3 infantry from the 5th Infantry Division, the 1 regiment and then the 1 regiment of the 101st Airborne, which I had written this backwards. So that was the U.S. casualties. So the U.S. lost 3 infantry and an airborne. Then the Soviets lost 2 mech, the 4 fighters, and the 1 jet. And then finally, the U.S. Airborne Forces of the 13th Airborne Division out of Paris and the 17th Airborne Division off of the U.S. Build Q did an airborne landing in Berlin against the Soviet tank that was defending. The U.S. Swept away the Soviet tank at no loss to their forces. Then on the non-combat, the U.S. moved its air forces back into Italy, moved up the 2 tanks from Marseille into Austria, moved the infantry from Austria over to Turin. They delivered through sea lift their 2 mech and 2 armor from the build queue, and that was it. That was their non-combat. And then at the end of the turn, the U.S. collected 61 IPC. All right, over to the Soviets. The Soviets had 100 IPC to spend. They, I believe, spent it all, actually, yes. So, they bought a strategic bomber in Smolensk. They bought 2 infantry and a self-propelled gun here in Romania. They bought a self-propelled, or a Katyusha self-propelled artillery in Bulgaria. 3 tanks in Warsaw. Over in Norway, they put another infantry down in Oslo, and then bought a lot more infantry. They put 6 infantry in Moscow, 3 infantry in Kiev, and then they put 2 more infantry down here in Turkey. Combat. So, because the Allies destroyed a good chunk of the Soviet tactical air force, the Soviets also saw that initially in Munich, that a good chunk of basically the entirety of the NATO tactical air force was sitting in Munich. I mean, heavily defended, but also the Soviets did have the numbers to destroy it. So the Soviets went into Munich. They went in with, oh Lord, I can't remember now. They went in with 6 airborne, 4 mech, 3 self-propelled guns, 16 armor, and then a good chunk of their air force. There was a NATO AAA. Unfortunately, for the 2 rounds of combat that happened, it missed. In the end, NATO lost 1 infantry, 4 mech, 4 mechanized infantry, 2 self-propelled guns, 5 tanks, 2 fighters, 1 jet, 2 tacticals, while the Soviets lost their 6 airborne and 4 mech infantry. And then the Soviets launched a counterattack into Slovakia from Warsaw and West Poland. They did destroy the 3 tank regiments of the 8th Armored Division at a loss for the Soviet loss of 1 artillery. Non-combat, the Soviets shifted a lot of their armor around. They brought their armor from Kars over to Istanbul, and then they moved their armor from Istanbul up to Romania. They also moved their tanks from Greece up to Romania. They moved their 1 tank from Romania over here to Belarus just to check the U.S. 7th Army here. They also moved some infantry around to keep up a blocking position here against the U.S. and the NATO forces there. And then at the end of the turn, the Soviets collected 102 IPC. NATO had 75 to spend with the loss of their entire tactical air force. The NATO did buy 2 fighters for Belgium, and then 2 mech, 2 self-propelled guns, and 2 tanks. for Paris. Combat. NATO spooled up as much of their combat power as possible from Belgium, Paris, and Reims, and attacked into Munich to destroy the remaining three Katyushas and 16 tanks that were here in Munich. It was a victory, but a very costly victory. So, like I said, the Soviets lost three Katyushas and 16 tanks. NATO lost 1 airborne, 6 mechanized infantry, 3 artillery, 1 self-propelled gun, and 5 tanks. And then finally, these 4 mechanized infantry out of Austria attacked a lone Soviet infantry and 3 air transports that were sitting here in Breslau. The Soviet infantry and air transports were destroyed at no loss to the NATO mechanized infantry. Non-combat, NATO railed forces from Belgium to reinforce here, to reinforce their tanks in Munich. They can move 4 units by rail, as long as it's a continuous green zone, and that hasn't been nuked. They moved their 4 infantry from Holland into West Germany. They sea-lifted an infantry and a AAA from Rome all the way up here to West Germany as well. They moved 1 AAA from West Germany down here to to Munich to protect the Army of the Rhine down there. They moved this destroyer and transport out of the Mediterranean. 1, 2, 3 up there. And then that was basically it. And then at the end of the turn, NATO collected 77 IPC. So just kind of going over the board right now. So a lot of the army after army keeps getting destroyed. So right now, I'll just kind of go over it. So like the U.S. 7th Army in Hungary now will consist of the 2 mechanized infantry from the 34th/47th Division. Mechanized Infantry Division. There's 3 artillery, and then 6 tanks. 3 of the 3rd of the 3rd Armored Division, and 3 of the 6th Armored Division. The Army of the Rhine has 4 infantry and 5 tanks. The Army Card in Reims has a NATO air transport, 2 NATO strategic bombers, and the 4 U.S. infantry of the 89th Infantry Division. So those are the Army cards right now. And then up here in Leningrad, there are 4 infantry and 2 marine units. That kind of help you see a little bit better. So that is what is in Leningrad as of right now. Pull it back out a little bit. Oh, I kind of went too far. Sorry about that. All right. Well, that is it. That is going to be it for turn 7. And we will see you guys. I mean, just kind of looking at it. I mean, if you look at Europe right now, if the Allies can somehow win, if NATO and the U.S. can get the initiative at the start of turn 8, that might actually, it could spell victory for the Allies. Because at that point, I mean, the 7th Army might be able to break into Romania, destroy this concentration of Soviet forces. These 2 tanks should be able to at least back them up. There is this concentration of Soviet forces. But if the 7th Army is successful without much loss, it could do something. Even with the Soviets going last, I mean, they do have the atomic bomb here that they could stop the U.S. forces here in Romania for a turn to give them some breathing room, but that might still spell, it could still spell victory for the Allies if both of them can get the if both of them can win the initiative against the Soviets and make the Soviets go last. But we will have to see. So that is going to be it for turn 7, and we will see you guys next time for turn 8. So until then, guys, as always, take care.